Part 69. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 689. Looking at the mighty river in the sky, the fat man had a toothache. He obviously had an opportunity and a bug. When he entered this node, he just picked up the treasure. Why did he become the first one to be cheated inexplicably? Object. The controller of this node, or the weapon spirit that can be called gold, actually started to attack himself. Damn it! Fatty felt like 10,000 horses were racing through his heart right now. Smelly bitch, you are trying to trick me, fat man, you are really trying to trick me. At this time, Fatty really regretted why he had set eyes on this Jade Ruyi in the first place. If this Jade Ruyi had always been with Subai, this kind of thing might not have happened. Either he was thrown under the bed in the room by Subai or given to the little guy as a toy, or he was directly ravaged by Subai to the point of being miserable. At least he won't be directly deceived by the residual soul of the princess in Yuruyi like he is now. Fatty knows a little about the Imperial Seal, not because Fatty has good historical skills, but because Fatty used to work part-time as a fool in the countryside of Sichuan, tricking ordinary people into collecting valuable old things and reselling them. Sell, now even the common people are not so easy to fool, I'm sure they will still be fooled, so I know a little about things like antiques. You stinky bitch, open your eyes and take a look. Is this the national jade seal passed down by your family? This is just a piece of gold used to fill a gap in the national jade seal passed down by your family. It has nothing to do with the half-cent of the first emperor of your family. It was put in by King Mang. Why are you pretending to him? Fatty can be sure that if the residual soul of the princess can lower her body, maybe this piece of gold can be talked about a lot easier. After all, people, or intelligent creatures, always like to find more presents for themselves. The original intention of this piece of gold is also it should be wanted to be or considered to be a part of the national jade seal, rather than something dispensable that is later inlaid. This can be seen from the polite attitude of the other party from the beginning, but Her Royal Highness the Princess just staged it and made people angry, and they immediately stopped looking at you. Brother, if you have something to say, say it well. If you have something to say it well, Fatty explained hurriedly. But the young man in the wheelchair still stretched out his finger and pointed at the fat man. I don't know if killing you will bring disaster to my existence, but I'm sorry, I still want to kill you now, because your soul is already separated from hers inseparable. If I kill her, I will also kill you, and if I kill you, I will also kill her, right? Boom. For a time. The water of the Pearl River rises from the sky, roaring and pouring down below. This scene is so spectacular that it makes people speechless. However, the people on the streets of Beijing Road below are still doing business, shopping, etc. Those who loiter, they seem not to see the visions of heaven at all. After all, they are all fake. Just like the young man in the wheelchair, he is just a piece of gold added later, not the real ancestral dragon jade seal that the ancestral dragon held to crush the black dragon. Everyone's bloodline has its own fixed magic, just like Menbi's who has now passed through formations. His innate ability is that he can easily pass through barriers and formations. However, it is true that Mr. Lay's formation is not so easy to pass through. When he appeared here, there was smoke all over his body, and he also suffered a lot of injuries. At his feet was a pile of rubble, and in front of him was the old Beijing Road from 20 years ago. Menbi subconsciously stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. Oh God, it turns out there really is a magic weapon that can control time and space. Sun Hai, who was covered in charred black, was half kneeling on the rubble. His injuries were indeed serious, but he didn't care. He was already here. He was already here. Ha 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 ha. At this time, laughing loudly is the best way to express his joy at this time. He wants to laugh, he wants to laugh. The rank of senior audience is already beckoning to him. Come on, burn, the power in my body, from now on, I will be a high-level listener. Sun Hai roared with a ferocious face, and in an instant he released all the suppression and seals on his body, and all the power of the thousands of dead souls of the castle that he had absorbed in the previous story world spread out. From low-level listeners to senior listeners, it is the simplest qualitative change caused by quantitative changes. However, it is no longer that simple to advance from senior listeners to senior listeners. It is very difficult to stack up to the senior listener level simply by relying on quantitative changes, but if your quantitative change really reaches a considerable point. So, it's not impossible. When all the strength in his body began to boil, Sun Hai slowly floated up. On his body, the aura of a high-level audience was already leaking out. It was obvious that he was breaking through the ranks. Circles of energy apertures spread out from his body. The aura of the advanced listener was becoming clearer and clearer, but his body gradually began to tremble, like a car traveling at high speed, with a tendency to fall apart. But with Sun Hai's promotion, when he began to step into the level of high-level listeners, the surrounding space, or to be precise, this node, was being attracted and resonated with him. The emergence of this place is inherently a mistake, and because advanced listeners themselves can resonate greatly with the surrounding space, when advanced listeners enter this place, their own aura will actively correct the error. Here, it should not exist, and now, it should collapse and disappear. This is the tone of this real world. It works, it really works. Sun Hai grinned so much that he couldn't help but smile. The huge force that could have crushed him and exploded is constantly spreading out to the surrounding space, and the surrounding space is also actively connecting with himself. A kind of distortion and folding is happening here. At the same time, his violent power is also spreading. Place to go. Bring it on. Soon. Advanced listener. A living advanced listener. Fat Master will fight with you. The majestic water of the Pearl River directly crushed him. Although Fatty knew that the scene had more exaggerated effects, Fatty still had no choice. If he was crushed by this water, it was not his body but his own body that might collapse. Soul. At this point, the fat man no longer felt sorry for himself or complained about the unruly and willful little princess in him. The fat man could only fight with all his strength. The peachwood sword flew out from behind, and a mouthful of blood was sprayed on it, followed by a purple streak. The talisman was sacrificed by the fat man. Sacrifice my 3 years of longevity and give me a bright and clear sky. The purple talisman paper was attached to the peachwood sword. With the sword in his hand, the fat man stepped on Yubu, and the tip of the sword pointed directly at the water of the Pearl River above. However, at this moment, the surrounding space began to vibrate, as if everything here was made of paper, and now, someone was watering desperately outside, melting everything. The fat man was also horrified. Ah! It turns out that the potential that Fatty exploded before his death was so terrifying that even the space here was shattered by Fatty's will? The face of the young man in the wheelchair suddenly changed. His eyes had nearly 30 folds. In one of the shadows, he saw a man suspended in the air, and the surrounding space began to crack with him as the center. Haha, you actually dare to take my nodes and my life in exchange for your advancement. I'll let you advance, I'll let you advance. The young man waved his palm, and the turbulent Pearl River water separated in an instant, just like ink from an inkstone poured into a pond and began to be continuously diluted. The Pearl River water returned to the scene where it came from. The fat man was holding a mahogany sword and was about to strike hard when he found that there was only a light drizzle hitting his body. A feeling of being exhausted rose from the bottom of the fat man's heart. Damn it, I burned my longevity, you actually said you won't play anymore? In more than 20 scenes, more than 20 young people in wheelchairs uniformly performed the same action, patted the wheel of the wheelchair, and shouted. See a visitor out. At this time, the young man in the wheelchair must try his best to deal with the guy who is trying to step on his own space, that is, stepping on the meaning of his existence to be promoted. This is a game. Absolutely fight to the death. He couldn't be distracted anymore, and couldn't be distracted anymore. The water of the Pearl River, which had just been gathered together and scattered back to more than 20 scenes, began to rush down from one end of Beijing Road. The vendors and people walking on the street were not aware of it and were not affected at all, but every scene on the street the audience inside was completely carried away by the river water towards the Pearl River connecting to the other side of the street. It's time to clear out? Many listeners also found this unique antique shop. They were chatting with the young man in a wheelchair about life problems, but soon the river rushed over and carried him down. Fatty's side is an exception. Because Fatty burned his longevity in advance and sacrificed the purple talisman, the Pearl River water scattered in the scene was unable to rush him. The audience in the other scenes were as if they were retreating from the rapids in an amusement park. They were involuntarily carried by the river all the way down the river, and they sank there. No, to be precise, they left. The one who gathered all the young people in wheelchairs in more than 20 scenes appeared in front of Sun Hai with a wheelchair. He still sat on Lenyi and looked coldly at Sun Hai, who was still in an advanced state. Oh no! There is another exception. When Subai climbed out of the dry Pearl River, he felt his hair wet. When he stood on the bank, he found that the previously dry river was suddenly filled with water and began to flow. In fact, when the Pearl River water swept in, Subai happened to climb out of the river, and they missed each other perfectly. Standing by the river, Subai still held the cup of herbal tea that he had brought over before. Bah! He took a heavy sip. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 690. Life is full of many kinds of impossibilities. Even the life of an ordinary person can be analyzed in depth one by one. Different choices will lead to different results, but in complex situations, underneath, there is always a kind of necessity hidden. Of course, this kind of necessity has always been supported at a high level and has become a bit flashy. For example, people are doing it, but God is watching. But in fact, it seems that the real mainstream tone is that good people will not live long and harm will last for thousands of years. Naturally, the young man in the wheelchair cannot be called a scourge, but his identity is undoubtedly embarrassing. From the time when Wang Mang usurped the Han dynasty, he was used as a missing part to patch up with gold, until the main part of the national jade seal was completely destroyed. He is the only one left. Looking at him through Shakespeare's eyes, oh my God, his appearance and entire life are actually a tragedy. From a supplementary product at the beginning, it became the only remnant in the end. If it were simply currency circulating in people's hands, there might not be so many troubles, but it happened that he gave birth to his own wisdom. In this long and lonely life, he will actually be lonely, and self-doubt. Otherwise, he would not have to open an antique shop here and wait for people to come to the door and ask you directly. What does it mean to be destined to live long and prosperous by God? An intelligent life has embarrassingly existed for so many years. The rules of the world have also changed. He can only hide and cannot even take the initiative to practice. His self-deprecating overflowing with energy is indeed a reflection of his real situation. The most apt description. Even when the young man in the wheelchair slowly pushed his wheelchair from the street to Sun Hai, he was even thinking in his mind, if it ended here, would it be a better ending? And this embarrassing life of mine, and the troubles that keep embarrassing me. Subai was mentally ill, but the young man in the wheelchair was also seriously ill. He stretched out his hand, waved it gently, and shouted, "Hello! Hello!" It was just a greeting, because the young man was still hesitating, and finally had a chance to end himself. He didn't seem to be so willing to continue living. But Sun Hai has completed 90% of the promotion work at this time, and is basically about to complete his promotion. The aura and power of a high-level audience are filling him, giving him a genuine self-confidence. Facing the greeting from the young man in the wheelchair, Sun Hai simply replied with one word. Roll. The young man in the wheelchair was stunned for a moment, then nodded. All right. Suddenly I don't want to die anymore. He clapped his hands and shouted easily. Rewind. The surrounding wind began to flow backwards, and the water on the ground began to turn into steam and float upwards. Everything here was being reversed, and this naturally included Sun Hai's power. He had just completed the last step of the 9th achievement, but he was shocked to find that the aura of a senior audience in him was weakening. He could feel the flow of time going back, but he was helpless. This is actually a microcosm of the colorful life. If Sun Hai had responded with hello just now, maybe the whole process would have been completely different. Of course, it is also possible that the young man in the wheelchair still didn't want to die, and would still, although it was possible to stop Sun Hai, he suddenly felt that it was not a bad thing to be freed like this. Who? How can you make it clear? You bitch, you bastard, you still dare to chirp at me, fat man, I almost got killed by you, do you know that? The fat man was arrogantly arranging formations and cursing at the same time. The whole thing was messed up by the stinky woman's bad temper. The fat man really felt that he was unlucky. Picking up an object with ancient artifacts always brought good luck, and he even went to in some places. It's convenient to hang out in familiar places. It's good for you when it's your turn. People are very polite and have good attitudes, but the residual soul of the princess here is dragging them as hard as 2,580,000 yuan, which directly makes them anxious. What the hell is this? I know that I have to break through the scene to get to the scene where the accident happened, but you have to give me time to prepare. It's not that difficult to travel through the scene, it just takes some effort. Damn, are you finished yet? I have sacrificed 3 years of my life in vain. Don't worry about whether I can live for 3 more years. Fatty, I still want to have 4 generations of children living under one roof. The fat man worked for a long time. He placed small flags all around, and then he started to activate the formation. Although he didn't know what happened, Fatty knew that if he continued to stay here and enjoy the scenery more than 20 years ago, then no matter what happened, it would have nothing to do with him, that was for sure. With Fatty's character, even if he sees 2 old ladies arguing while walking on the street, he can't help but go over and take a look. How could he miss this incident? However, when the fat man had put a lot of effort into arranging the formation and was starting it, he suddenly vaguely saw a person floating in the air diagonally in front of him, and the space around him was cracked and broken. It started to recover again, and the young man in the wheelchair sat below with a serious face, staring coldly at the one above. The fat man's chest rose and fell again. Because just when he was trying his best to arrange the formation to make it easier for him to jump from one scene to another, the young man in the wheelchair had already merged all the sub-scenes into a single scene. In other words, Fatty has been busy all over again. He only needs to stand there motionless and he will come over naturally. The herbal tea was thrown to the ground by Subai. Young Master Su was very unhappy now, really very unhappy. Originally, Subai thought that the young man in the wheelchair was not bored enough to deliberately tease him, but now it seemed that the young man in the wheelchair was really bored to the point of being bored. That's right. Judging from the 2 critical gaps between Subai jumping into the river and climbing up, it would be too coincidental to say it was a coincidence. However, it is indeed a coincidence. The remaining WeChat contents sent by Fatty to Subai failed to be sent. In the end, only 233 was sent, which was of the same nature. It was just a coincidence. But so many coincidences suddenly appear together in a short period of time, it seems difficult to describe it simply as coincidence. For example, once the prize pool of China welfare lottery accumulates to a huge amount, it will often be won by a small lottery station in an inconspicuous place. People take away all the same in the form of heavy bets. Subai didn't want to be nostalgic here, nor did he want to listen to some popular hits from the 1990s. He didn't intend to play anymore, but the other party was actually playing with himself. Then let's play together. Originally, young Master Surili refused, but you asked me to jump into a pit, climbed up again, and played with me twice. Well, let's have fun together. In the distance, there were several figures. Subai could see it. Something seemed to be happening there. Because the distance was relatively far, Subai could not clearly see the faces of those people. He could only sense that the energy fluctuations there seemed to be very strong. It was so intense that Subai felt as if a high-level audience was here. Oh, it's quite lively. Subai didn't go there to join in the fun, at least he didn't plan to go there now. He was still walking down the street of Beijing Road. Soon, the antique shop appeared in Subai's sight again. After walking in, the young man in the wheelchair was naturally not in the store. There should be a serious problem at this point. It may even be that a high-level audience has invaded here. As the weapon spirit here, the young man in the wheelchair will naturally try his best to block it. Now it's probably a stalemate stage. This is the most traditional way of thinking. This is what Subai is speculating now. After all, it is impossible for Subai to know that the fat man who gave him the room number is also here, and there is also a guy who is trying to advance by stepping on the nodes here. Ascend. The antique shop was still the same, but Subai began to search more carefully. He had a hunch when he came in before that there should be something hidden in this shop. During the search this time, Subai was much more rude. Anyway, he had guessed that the young man in the wheelchair was fighting with the intruder outside, so he didn't have to worry about the owner's sudden return. Moreover, even if the owner suddenly came back, Subai was not afraid. Even though the other party was very mysterious, Subai was really not afraid. The other party had tricked him twice in a row, so he couldn't find a way to come back. Cabinets, shelves, pottery, and wooden boxes were thrown to the ground one by Subai. The ground was in a mess for a while, but these were all fake anyway, so it didn't matter. After searching for a while, Subai found nothing. He didn't find anything of value, but Subai did have a hunch that something should be hidden here, because this antique shop is special in the entire Beijing Road street. Maybe even the center of this fake world. Click. Subai's back foot seemed to have stepped on something, and the board was slightly dented. Subai immediately squatted down and inserted his fingers into the gap in the board. Then he slowly exerted force. Subai opened a gap in the board, and it was tight. Then, Subai saw a piece of golden gold as big as a thumb cap below. Hee. Subai smiled, reached out and dug out the piece of gold, put it in his palm and played with it carefully for a while. Why does this gold look so like gold? Could it be that the mystery inside it is something that I cannot figure out at my current level? But Subai thought about it, frowned, and squatted down again. This time, his palms were directly on the floor, and then he exerted force. Boom! The entire wooden floor of the antique store was lifted open by Subai in an instant. Below, there are actually piles of stuff piled high on top of each other. It's all gold. Take a deep breath. This guy is boring enough. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 691. In a room full of gold, one of them might be the real thing, but they might all be fake. Whether it is the former or the latter possibility, it means one thing, that is, we want to find the real so-called gold body from here. It's very difficult. Facing this little golden mountain, Subai didn't have any special feelings. After all, the audience basically took money and other things very lightly, not to mention that Subai had once been a money-splitting boy. However, Subai still felt that that person was really a pain in the ass. It would be understandable if he had placed all the imitation jade seals under the floor. But he ended up with a bunch of gold and put it here. It was really baffling. Could it be that he was doing it on purpose? The baby you gave birth to? In other words, the so-called essence overflowing is actually the gold overflowing? After a while, Subai walked out of the antique shop. All right. In fact, there is very little room for choice now. Run to the Pearl River again like a retarded person and then land with a pop? Then, the only option left is to join in the fun. Subai walked over slowly. He didn't walk very fast. To be honest, Subai didn't like to join in the fun, especially in the real world, because in the real world, whether it was fighting over something or fighting over something, both sides have to be restrained and even reasonable. After all, the real world is different from the story world. In the story world, listeners can kill listeners at will. As long as you can kill, you can kill. But in the real world, you have to be reasonable. If you are not reasonable, the radio will educate you. Just like when we went to see in Kinhuangdao, everyone was coy. You covered your face and I held an umbrella. Even when you were fighting for something in the end, you still measured your moves and couldn't go beyond the slightest. When you attack someone, you have to worry about whether the other person really intended to kill you before. If he didn't really want to kill you and your reason for killing him is not strong, you can't kill him. In the story world, the audience is like a bunch of young and dangerous guys from Causeway Bay, but in the real world, they quarrel and then cry to the broadcasting teacher for comment. Because of this, Subai was unwilling to participate in some things in the real world. But now, there is no other choice, just watch a show. As he got closer, Subai saw a familiar figure 100 meters away on the other side. Well, it was also because that figure was so recognizable. Fatty also discovered Subai. First, the two of them were too far apart before, and second, in this place, many sensory abilities will be greatly affected, because this node is already unstable, so the two have to wait until they get closer. We just discovered each other, and I have to say, it's quite interesting. Both sides were a little surprised, but the protagonists here were not the two of them. The two just looked at each other and nodded. They both knew that now was not the time to chat and reminisce. Ah! Sun Hai roared again and again. He was fighting against the reversed time. He could not fail, because there was no turning back when he opened the bow. He had to succeed, and failure meant death. The young man in the wheelchair still had a serious expression on his face. You couldn't see how strenuous he was, and you couldn't feel how difficult it was for him. He seemed to be a bystander like Subai and Fatty, watching the fun. Sun Hai's roar was constantly changing. Slowly, it turned into a howl. From the initial resistance to the current struggle and torture, although from the perspective of a spectator, the difference was not very big. They were both howling. It's called that, but in fact, the gap is really huge, because it means that in this confrontation, Sun Hai has fallen behind in terms of momentum, and even in terms of state of mind, he is slowly losing ground. Crushed by a young man in a wheelchair. The fat man rubbed his hands. He looked at Subai, then at Sun Hai, and finally, his eyes fell on the young man in the wheelchair. The princess's remnant soul kept roaring at the fat man. Yes, the fat man seemed to have installed a super speaker in his heart. The princess's roar filled his heart. She seemed to roar louder than here. Sun Hai is even more intense. Go, kill him, kill him. As long as I capture his body, I can let you absorb him. By then, in your eyes, the high-level audience is no longer a threshold, and you will have the opportunity to gain a trace of mastery. The power of time, cause and effect plus the temptation and temptation of time, can you refuse it? Go, kill him, I don't care where he really comes from, but his wisdom, his existence, comes from the ancestral dragon jade seal. He is my servant of the Ying family, he actually dares to roar at me, how dare you murder me? This is the crime of deceiving the emperor. Go, kill him, kill him. As long as you help me kill him, I can promise you that I can make that piece of gold your magic weapon. With it, your understanding of cause and effect will make a qualitative leap. Advanced listener, is no longer a threshold, nor is it difficult. Once you become an advanced listener, you are no longer a low-level role among advanced listeners. The fat man's breathing was getting heavier and heavier. Obviously, apart from the remnant soul of the princess that kept roaring in his heart, the fat man was also engaged in a war between heaven and man in his heart. Obviously I think I will have good luck today, and from the cause and effect calculation, I will also encounter happy things today, but now it seems that my luck today is not ordinary. Subai saw that cracks had appeared on the wheelchair of the young man in the wheelchair. Obviously, he was not as calm and relaxed as he seemed. In fact, both Sun Hai and the young man in the wheelchair had tried their best and were both in death together. On the edge, as soon as this duel begins, it directly means the final outcome. You die and I die. Although the fat man is fat, he is also very careful. He can naturally see that the condition of the young man in the wheelchair is not very good, but at this time, he is still struggling. Oh shit! Who should I help? Help Sun Hai? Make a high-level audience. Give him a life-saving grace and let him owe himself a huge favor? Help this nugget of gold? And then expect to get some benefits from gold? No, if you help Sun Hai, not only can you gain favors, but you also have a high probability of grabbing the gold body first. This is the greatest value. The fat man kept struggling and thinking, and the fingers of his hands kept shaking, obviously making extremely precise causal calculations. Subai just stood aside and continued to watch this invisible confrontation. With Sun Hai suspended in mid-air as the center of the circle, the surrounding void cracked for a while, then healed again, like a mouth, opened for a while, and then healed for a while. Close it, it's quite interesting. Subai looked at it and slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, he put himself in Sun Hai's position, and he was dominating the cracking space around him. Once collected. Once released. Go ahead. Reverse. Call. Interesting. Subai slowly opened his eyes again. This feeling was very mysterious. Subai remembered it. After all, Subai was not a genius in martial arts stories who had a sudden enlightenment and ascended to heaven. Subai, this is not the path he is taking. If he wants to achieve enlightenment and ascend, Fatty, a Taoist priest, is much more likely than him. However, when Subai looked at the fat man again, he found that the fat man seemed to be possessed. His fingers were trembling, the corners of his mouth were murmuring, and his lips were broken in several places. There is also blood spilling out. The fat man is still calculating. He can feel that whether he can get the maximum benefit from this opportunity and get the opportunity to be promoted to a senior audience is right in front of him. He must make the right choice, he cannot choose the wrong one. It's like a candidate who brings cheat sheets with him during an exam. For the exact same question, you have already calculated the answer and have a clear idea, but you feel that since you have brought the answer, you are still afraid to be completely reassured. Just secretly take out the cheat sheet and compare it. The fat man is in this state now, and he is already crazy. He is calculating, he is testing, he is deducing, and he must hurry up, otherwise once the outcome of the confrontation between the wheelchair youth and Sun Hai comes out, he will be nothing. Under this absolutely ethereal and immersive calculation, Fatty couldn't even hear the screams of the princess's remnant soul in his heart. He fell into a kind of self-indulgence. He somewhat enjoyed this moment, but he also knew, this moment cannot last too long. The princess's remnant soul also slowly stopped roaring. She could feel that the fat man was making the most nervous calculations, but she still sighed. Actually, I have told you some things. You must leave him early and cut off the relationship with him. The three of you, together with him, will only become his wedding dress. This is why I chose you in the first place. The reason for not choosing him is that you really shouldn't continue to contact him. Giving him Qinbing's body was a waste of time, and taking the initiative to contact him before was also a waste of time. Whirring. The fat man gasped heavily. Just now, he suddenly calculated a result, and this result had nothing to do with the wheelchair youth and Sun Hai in front of him. This result was: no matter who I choose to help in front of these two people. So, the ultimate beneficiary is not himself, but Subai, who is standing over there, no different from a bystander. By Max. The fat man licked his lips. He knew that his face looked a little unnatural now. Subai looked at the fat man. The fat man pointed his finger at Sun Hai and the young man in the wheelchair. This was a question. Subai smiled slightly. Take a step back. Express. I won't participate, and I won't compete with you for anything, because you are Zhang Bei. The fat man suddenly laughed. If he didn't make a choice, he would lose everything. No matter who wins, Sun Hai or the young man in a wheelchair, it has nothing to do with him. But if he makes a choice, just to make a wedding dress for Subai, this is the result he calculated. And just now, Subai took a step back to show his attitude of not arguing with him. In the past, it seemed very heartwarming. But now, suddenly, I felt that the crisp sound of that step was so harsh to the fat man. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 693. Sometimes, it is difficult for some things to be as simple and pure as he imagined before. Fatty felt that his lips were a little bitter, as if he had just swallowed a large piece of poison. Cause and effect, poisonous. This is not a metaphor or an exaggeration, but a real experience. If Fatty hadn't calculated this result, maybe no matter what choice Fatty made, Subai would be the one to benefit in the end. At most, Fatty would jealously punch Subai on the chest with his small fist and force Subai to do so. Treat him to a barbecue after going out. Even after getting over the initial jealousy, Fatty would feel sincerely happy that Subai could be promoted to a high-level audience. Because the relationship between Subai and Fatty is not that of pure friends, but they can be regarded as sympathy. Subai is promoted to a high-level audience early, and Fatty will be happy to see it happen. Similarly, when Fatty decides to take action, choose a side to gamble. When he joined the battle group, Subai, who was just watching with the mentality of watching the show and joining in the fun, took the initiative to take a step back to show his attitude that he would not participate or compete with you fat man, which was also a gesture of mutual trust. Make your attitude clear, I won't pick your peaches. However, the problem now is that Fatty has calculated a result. It is like two good friends working hard together to get the first place in the class. They cherish each other. No matter who takes the first place in the end, the other one will also be convinced. I'm happy, but when one of them is considered to be predestined, the nature of the matter is completely different. Can they still be good friends? Can we continue to cherish each other? Can the other side continue to maintain a peaceful attitude? This is how Fatty feels now. He can't calm down his mood. He really can't bear the consequences that will fall on Subai in the end, even if Subai doesn't do anything now and takes a step back. Human beings are complex and tangled products. Fatty was struggling. He didn't even know what to do, because the results of causal calculation showed that even if he did nothing, Subai would gain the most in the end. Damn it, why is this? The fat man screamed in his heart. He really couldn't figure out the reason for all this. Why was Subai destined to get the greatest benefit even though he didn't do anything? Why could he always live casually? Why? Why? The fat man gritted his teeth, and an idea suddenly appeared in his mind, that is, kill Subai now. Kill him. There will be no one to fight with you. Kill him. There is no need to be unbalanced in your own mind. Kill him. Everything is fair again. But soon, the fat man took a deep breath and discarded all the evil thoughts that had just occupied his mind. He began to breathe heavily and pant. The fat man was very confused. Why did he have the idea of killing Subai in his mind just now? No matter what choice he makes, Subai will ultimately benefit. This includes whether he chooses to help Sunhai or choose to help the young man in a wheelchair or neither. But if he chooses to attack Subai now and try to kill Subai, this doesn't need to be calculated at all, and it will not benefit you at all. Killing a partner with whom we have a good relationship even if they don't live together now, not to mention whether it can be killed or not, the loss is already big enough, and the fat man actually knows in his heart that under a one-on-one fair environment, I guess I am really no match for Subai now. Some things, after you see the ending, will you feel very entangled. The voice of the princess's remnant soul sounded again. People, it is actually more interesting to live in confusion. Bitch, why are you pretending to be here with me now? The first thing that the fat man will do when he leaves here is to separate you from my soul. You are just a remnant soul, so why are you pretending to be noble and cool? The fat man yelled at the princess's remnant soul in his heart. Then what are you going to do? Just give away the fruit to others. Give away the opportunity to be promoted to a senior audience that you have been pursuing. The princess's remnant soul didn't seem to care at all about the fat man's bad attitude towards her. Of course, it was also because she had no choice, because the fat man was now her host, and she was completely dependent on others. Before, she dared to lose her temper with the young man in the wheelchair. According to current sayings, the lingering poison of feudal ideology is relatively strong. It is the biggest taboo or called inverse scale to believe that one's own servants must not disrespect oneself. But Fatty, as long as he is willing now, he can completely waste some of his essence and directly refine himself, and Fatty is not her domestic slave. I don't know, I really don't know. The fat man's lips trembled. Now, he suddenly felt like a lost lamb. He could clearly see the road farther ahead, but he still couldn't make a choice. I saw a road, but it was not the road I wanted to take. Lu Sun once said that there is no road in the world, but when more people walk on it, it becomes a road. But in fact, there are countless roads in the world. Only if someone is willing to take them can they be called roads. Fatty is now in this tangled and embarrassing situation. Even this strange reaction caught Subai's attention. The fat man was only 100 meters away from him. From such a distance, Subai could naturally tell something with his perception and familiarity with the fat man. Bitch, stop bothering me, stop bothering me. The fat man suddenly knelt down, held his head with both hands, and banged his forehead hard on the broken concrete slab in front of him, and he hit it so hard that his head was broken and bleeding. At this time, it was obviously inappropriate for Subai to continue to be a spectator, so he could only walk towards the fat man. On one side, there was a stalemate between a young man in a wheelchair and Sunhai. Spiderweb-like cracks continued to appear on the sky and then slowly recovered. However, the cracks that appeared the second time were much larger than the last time. Obviously, the duel between the two sides had already begun. Entering the second half of the state. On the other side, the fat man was kowtowing and bleeding. The whole scene is really weird because it's all silent. In the duel between the young man in the wheelchair and Sunhai, there was no other sound except Sunhai's occasional gasping. Even if there were cracks in the void, it would be silent, and there would be no rumble or sound like cloth being torn. But there was just a constant muffled sound from Fatty's side. Although there was sound, it reflected a kind of tranquility. At this time, walking among them, Subai felt as if he was watching a silent comedy by Chaplin. However, Subai didn't understand very well, nor did he find it funny, such as why Sun Hai was having sex with Chi Ling and why the fat man was banging his head. When he came to the fat man's side, Subai did not squat down and pat the fat man's shoulders to comfort him. Instead, he took out 2 cigarettes, put them together in his mouth, took a lighter and took a puff, then handed one of the cigarettes to the fat man. The fat man stopped kowtowing and looked at the burning cigarette in front of him. He suddenly turned his head and looked at Subai. At this time, in Subai's view, the fat man's eyes were red. And Subai also sensed the murderous intention rising from the fat man, and this murderous intention was directed at him. But Subai didn't retreat, let alone make any defensive posture, and continued to hold out the cigarette. The fat man finally took the cigarette, put it in his mouth and took a deep breath. Then he blew out white smoke from his nostrils and spit on the ground. The fat man put his hand on Subai's shoulder. "Dabai, let me tell you something that comes from my heart." Subai nodded, indicating that the fat man could continue. "You know, you come over to comfort me now, give me a cigarette, and take a step back before, you are actually irritating me to want to kill you even more." The fat man slapped Subai's shoulders hard, so hard that Subai's body began to tremble slightly, and with each slap, there was a muffled sound of bumping. The fat man's forehead was full of blood and his flesh and blood were blurred, but his mood was very unstable, like that of a drug addict who had just overdosed. "I don't know what this means." After Subai said this, he also laughed, and then pointed at himself. "Did the words I just said make you want to kill me?" "Yes." The fat man gritted his teeth so hard that he made a squeaking sound. In the eyes of the fat man, Subai's behavior was just pretending to be innocent. "You have eaten up all the benefits, but you are still pretending to be innocent with me, acting cute, you are looking for death." But Fatty still suppressed his inner impulse over and over again, because Fatty himself also knew that Subai didn't know what would happen in the future, and the future hadn't happened yet, so he had to use the future he saw and what happened in the future. If you blame someone now, you are actually making trouble unreasonably. "Dabai, you seem to really understand," Fatty said, staring at Subai. "I'm actually quite confused about you and the 2 people over there, but I at least understand a little bit." "Know what?" "I can see that you are struggling," Subai continued, "am I right?" "Haha, what should I do?" "Can you teach me?" The fat man smiled disdainfully. "You haven't studied cause and effect, how can you help me?" "You really asked the right person, so I rarely have to worry about it." Subai actually saw more things, but at this time, it was not convenient to say too much. To be honest, Subai really didn't want the fat man to follow the same path as Lan Lin or become like that old firefighter. "People." As he spoke, Subai walked towards the wheelchair youth and Sun Hai. "Wave." "Fat man, when people are alive, they sometimes make calculations. It's very boring. We become the audience, trying to survive at all costs, not for the sake of survival, but because we feel that life is more important to us than death. To be more attractive, if living was painful, you would have chosen to commit suicide long ago. For example, if it were me who had to choose. It's actually really easy." Subai raised his foot and kicked the face of the wheelchair-bound young man in front of him hard. "I will let you bring the water of the Pearl River up from the sky." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 695. What if the future is doomed? Then there is no need to look at the answer in the future, and it will be more comfortable to continue living in confusion. What if the future is changing? Then there is no need to look at the answer in the future, it will change anyway. This was also the reason why Subai had rejected Ji Xiang's prophetic ability before. In fact, This was also Sudbai's attitude towards cause and effect. For a person like him, cause and effect could not bring him pleasure, but only brought him pleasure. It can bring him pain, because he is a person with extremely abnormal nerves. He can accept any changes and blows, and can even often use his own life as a bet to do willful things just to win that moment of happiness. Pleasure. Especially after seeing Sunar's tombstone from the painting, Sudbai was almost completely immersed in that incident. Sunar's future death was always on Sudbai's mind, which led to the next incident. Series of things, in fact, sometimes Sudbai would selfishly think about it: if he didn't know this scene, would his life be easier? Even if Sunar dies, but he doesn't know that she will die, will it be easier for him? This is a very selfish idea, but Sudbai has never denied that he is a selfish person. Being able to see the future picture can only bring huge pressure to Sudbai and lower his self-esteem. The quality of life affects your mood. In the end, Sunar's tombstone still appeared, but Sunar did not die. The scenes predicted in the painting appeared, but the result seemed to be completely different from what he had expected. Sudbai didn't want to know whether the future was like this or not. He has changed the future. He just feels that if life is lived like this and life is played like this, it will be very tiring and boring. Sudbai saw the pain and strangeness of the fat man. Sudbai didn't know the reason why the fat man fell into such entanglement and pain. But once you get into some things, it is difficult to get out of them. The cause and effect is poisonous, but extremely sweet. What Sudbai can do is to tell the fat man with his actual actions in front of the fat man that in fact, there is another way to live in life. There is no need to really act based on cause and effect, even if you really figure something out. Sudbai didn't study cause and effect. He never wanted to get involved in this thing, not because he was afraid, but because he found it annoying. This kick was actually wrong, because no matter the first time Sudbai jumped into the Pearl River in an attempt to leave, or the second time Sudbai happened to climb ashore, it was not deliberately designed by the young man in a wheelchair to tease Sudbai. It was a coincidence, but Sudbai didn't care whether he would wrongfully accuse someone. He just felt that he was like a funny man, jumping down and climbing up again, so he was very unhappy. In fact, many times, the reason of unpleasant was it is already stronger than any rational analysis. The stalemate between the young man in the wheelchair and Sun Hai was much more intense than Sudbai had expected, because when Sudbai's leather boots almost came into contact with the young man's face, the other party still didn't react at all. Then, boom! The young man in the wheelchair was kicked out of the wheelchair by Sudbai. His head was kicked off and turned to his shoulders at an extremely exaggerated angle. His body rubbed against the ground for more than 10 meters before stopping. At this time, he was lying on the ground, motionless, his face facing Sudbai, expressionless, as if he was dead, or like a rickets patient paralyzed on the ground. On the other side, the surrounding space began to crack crazily, and the cracks extended infinitely like huge tentacles, covering most of the sky in an instant. This node is about to collapse. Obviously, the young man in the wheelchair has lost all shackles and ability to compete. This place will become a stepping stone for Sun Hai to advance. The fat man stood aside, and he didn't notice that the cigarette butt had burned his hand. He just felt a little at a loss for the scene in front of him. Sudbai took the initiative to take back the step of withdrawing, and kicked the young man in the wheelchair. This possibility, Fatty has never calculated, because any calculation is based on known conditions to infer unknown conditions, so when Fatty calculated before, he regarded Sudbai's step back and not participating as a known condition. Therefore, Sudbai he took the initiative to walk over and kick the young man in the wheelchair over. This was not at all in the fat man's previous calculation. Therefore, Sudbai's move directly overturned all the results that Fatty had worked hard to calculate before. The future that was originally clear suddenly became unclear again. The fat man was stunned, so much so that the remnant soul of the princess stopped making a sound, and the youth in the wheelchair who was kicked over did not move. But the sound here was still very loud, because Sun Hai was about to be promoted, and when Subai helped him kick him when the young man turned the wheelchair, there was no obstacle for him. Roar! Sun Hai roared like a beast. Senior audience, he is coming. Sun Hai was very excited, very excited. It would be difficult for any normal listener to maintain his original intention when he was promoted to a senior listener. The space began to slowly collapse, with a dark and deep feeling, as if it was the rhythm of the end of the world. Of course, the promotion of a senior listener would not cause such a big scene. The essential reason is that this is just a node. The world is not the real world. After all, Subai has seen with his own eyes even the scene of a big shot audience preaching. Crash la la la. Everything begins to crumble, as if there are false images projected by fragile mirrors in all directions. Now that the mirrors are broken, everything will return to its original state. Strong white light shone in, bringing an unreal feeling, but everyone knew that after the white light passed, everything returned to its original state. Sure enough, everything returned to normal soon. Sun Hai, Subai, and Fatty all appeared in room 233. Sun Hai clenched his hands into fists and seemed to be still enjoying the afterglow of joy that he was about to be promoted to a senior audience. However, when the surroundings returned to normal, he changed back to room 233. During the scene in the room, Sun Hai suddenly showed a hysterical expression. How is it possible? How is it possible? Sun Hai stopped his promotion because he returned to the real world, but his promotion was not completed until the last step, but the node that was originally used to withstand his violent power collapsed early, which meant that his last remaining violent power was not available. The method is spread out smoothly and must be digested by oneself, but the consequence of one's own digestion is likely to fall short in the last critical step. Although Sun Hai stopped moving, his body began to slowly expand. Half of his feet had entered the level of advanced listeners. Even, to be more precise, the other foot had already stepped halfway in. It's just the last bit, but why is this damn node so careless? Sun Hai's eyes began to reveal a fierce black light, and the remaining violent undead power in his body not only slowly inflated his body, but also caused his soul to suffer tremendous backlash pain. But he can't release this power, nor can he transmit it, because the nodes have collapsed. This is not purely about too much energy in the body. If it is just too much energy in the body, then he only needs to keep venting it against the surrounding attacks. Just get rid of the excess energy, and for Sun Hai, this power is the key to his promotion to the senior audience. He has been suppressing and sealing this power before, and this power is the source of uncontrolled riots for Sun Hai. It can help him reach the high-end audience, but he will be overthrown at the same time. He couldn't control this power, so naturally he couldn't fight it out. The fat man looked at Sun Hai in front of him. He suddenly felt a little funny. This guy's promotion wasn't over yet? This node collapsed so early? Was it that the piece of gold would rather die than drag Sun Hai to die with him, so he ended the resistance early and caused this node to collapse so that Sun Hai had no place to channel the remaining violent power in his body, and then dragged Sun Hai to be buried with him? Perhaps, this is really possible. The fat man subconsciously glanced at Subai who was standing next to him, because the person next to him liked to do this kind of thing the most. Subai still had a cigarette in his mouth, and the cigarette was half burned. Now, the node collapsed, and the senior listener in front of him obviously didn't feel so good. He seemed to be roaring non-stop from the beginning to now. Subai felt that he was too exaggerated. Sun Hai clenched his hands into fists and stretched out his arms. He couldn't control this power anymore. He really couldn't control it. The rhythm of promotion couldn't be interrupted. His forced interruption now has caused huge damage to him. Mr. Lei, Mr. Lei. Sun Hai seemed to suddenly think of something. By the way, he can find Mr. Lei now. He has a solution. As an array master, he must have a solution. Pa bang bang. The crisp sound of explosions came from Sun Hai's body. His bones, his skin, his flesh, and his soul were constantly collapsing and disintegrating. Because the node collapsed prematurely and unexpectedly, Sun Hai forcibly terminated his promotion. He will inevitably have to endure this terrible backlash. He wants to find Mr. Lei, because he has been promoted for most of the time, and Mr. Lei should be able to solve the remaining violent undead power in his body. He can now use his identity as a high-level listener. Go and beg Mr. Lei. Mr. Lei should also help you accept the favor you owe. Sun Hai quickly turned around and kicked open the door of the room. He felt that Mr. Lei might be standing outside the door at this time. Mr. Lei, help. Sun Hai was stunned. Subai casually dropped the cigarette in his hand on the sheets. The cigarette butt flickered on and off, and the sheets were as clean as new. Seeing this scene, Subai was stunned for a moment, and then shook his head. I was deceived. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 696. Sun Hai opened the door. Behind the door, he did not see Mr. Lei, nor any of the audience members who had been forcibly kicked out before, not even the aisle. In front of me is a bustling crowd. This is the street of Old Beijing Road. 2 stalls selling herbal tea and fruits are facing the door. Inside this door is the door of the 7 Days Hotel. There is also a fire escape diagram on the door. Outside is a worn-out wooden board with a sign reading public toilet hanging on it. This. Sun Hai opened his mouth wide. At this time, the blood splashing out from his body and the torture coming from the depths of his soul could no longer attract his attention at all. Because he was completely in despair. He, who was already standing in the clouds, fell into the abyss in an instant. Under such ups and downs, even the audience's super psychological quality would be really difficult to bear. In fact, even if this node really collapses in advance, Sun Hai, who has already shed a large part of the violent undead power in his body, can definitely gamble on his luck, because he has almost completed his promotion, and he only needs to take the last step to bite him. Grit your teeth, the probability of successfully advancing is over 50%, or even higher. But it seems that because he feels that he has almost become a high-level audience, Sun Hai's mentality has also undergone tremendous changes. He does not dare to gamble anymore. In the past, he was barefoot and not afraid of wearing shoes, but now he is a bit like the son of a rich man who does not sit down. The meaning of church. He felt that it was more sensible and safer to go to Mr. Lei, because he could barely be regarded as a senior listener now and was on the same level as Mr. Lei. Mr. Lei should be able to help him. With Mr. Lei, with help, I will probably have more than 90% chance of successfully completing the last step. So he took the initiative to stop promotion, so he endured the torture of being backlashed by the power in his body to open the door. The dream was very full, but the reality was so skinny. When he opened the door and saw the scene outside, Sun Hai's heart felt completely cold. He lit the explosive bag with his own hands, but stupidly he ran over from a relatively safe position and hugged the explosive bag again. He is dead. Yes. Dead. Sun Hai's lips were a little white. He still couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had always had the advantage. Even though Mr. Lei had not allowed him to enter room 233 before, he still came in with the help of Menbis. And then began to advance. Although the weapon spirit showed a very difficult power, and even oppressed himself to an embarrassing and almost desperate situation, he could still sense that the other party was at the end of his strength, and he had already opened his bow. There is no turning back and I can only continue to push forward. In addition, there was an audience member who came out of nowhere and kicked the weapon spirit in the face. The power that the weapon spirit exerted on himself to stalemate him disappeared directly after being kicked. The advancement has been completed, only the last step is left. But as the environment changed, when I was about to succeed, I suddenly became afraid and suddenly sought stability. This is a big no-no for promotion to senior listeners. Xie Zhen once said that being promoted to a senior audience requires great courage and courage. But just now, Sun Hai was intimidated and scared, so he was finished. Subai reached out and touched his chin. In fact, this node was really on the verge of collapse. The fact that there was no change in the fact that he had left his cigarette butt on the bed sheet was enough to explain the problem. This node was already too weak to proceed. The level of detail processing is even more delicate. Subai himself had personally stolen a cup of herbal tea from the street before and tasted the taste of herbal tea, so he knew how terrifying the details could have been at this point. Now, it's no longer possible. But the first thing that failed seemed to be not the piece of gold, but the audience who was meeting for the first time. The joints on his body were making brittle sounds, and his skin and flesh were slowly decaying. His forehead turned blue, and his eyes began to lose focus. This listener, who had almost succeeded in reaching the advanced level of listener, had reached the end of his life and was about to die. Not dying in the story world, nor dying in strangulation, but dying at the dawn before success. This is the most ironic way to die, and also the most useless way to die. He was deceived by a simple illusion. He was not like this in the first place. How could someone who could reach the level of an advanced audience be so simple and stupid? But various coincidences and the specific environment at the time created such a result. He was deceived. Subai even thought in his mind, if this listener dies and sets up a tombstone, should it say died of being cheated on it? Of course, Subai understood the principle of lip loss and cold teeth, but the relationship between the audience, especially the relationship between strangers, was naturally not very harmonious. It was more about schadenfreude. Sun Hai slowly knelt down. He raised his head with difficulty and looked at Subai with complicated eyes. However, Subai could understand his gaze. He had helped him, but you should not let a dying person return the favor to you, or let him give you his life weapon as a final repayment. He will only blame you from the bottom of his heart and complain about why you made a move just now. If you follow the normal process of confrontation, he may not be deceived. This was indeed the case. Although Subai kicked the young man in a wheelchair in the face, it indirectly caused Sun Hai to be deceived and stopped his promotion. It is human nature for him to have such thoughts. People always have great resentment before they die. Of course, those who are euthanasia or those who die on the bed of old age can be excluded as exceptions. Subai shrugged and said helplessly, "You are stupid, don't blame others." Subai was telling the truth, but at this time, the truth was the most hurtful. He gave up when the situation was great. He had been fighting against you for so long and you still gritted your teeth and insisted on getting promoted, but in the end you still got the chance. It is no exaggeration to say that he interrupted his promotion without any resistance or pressure. It is said that he is seeking his own death. Sun Hai's chest rose and fell violently. He wanted to curse, but he could no longer curse. His soul was about to be burned out, his body was about to collapse completely, and the backlash would not let him go. When Sun Hai let out the last painful roar from his throat, a wisp of green smoke rose from the top of his head. It was the soul that turned into blue smoke. It was really extremely painful to die in this way. Later, the body will also collapse, but this body seems to have been pressed the still button in an instant. Click. The wall on the other side began to collapse, and a wheelchair slowly came in. The person sitting in the wheelchair was no longer a young man, but an old man with white hair and beard and a face covered with yellowish-brown spots. Well, the sunken footprints on the left side of the opponent's face are still very clear. He. The old man smiled and said, although he is old, he can still see that he is actually the young man in the wheelchair. Obviously, he had the last laugh in the stalemate battle between the two sides, but he has also paid too much, and his current grey hair is obviously not. It was transformed to deliberately tease Subai and Fatty. Old means old age, and also means a kind of decay. This piece of gold that once mended the national jade seal has gradually lost its luster. The fat man put out the cigarette butt and stood next to Subai. He looked at Subai, then at the old man in the wheelchair, and finally at the dead Sun Hai's body that was immobilized. Being fixed must have deep meaning. Fatty saw this more clearly than Subai, because there was a princess living in Fatty's heart. He's dead, the old man sighed. I'm almost there, but I think it can still be delayed for a few more decades. According to normal people's thinking, he lost and I won, right? His body still contains the last strength, and there is also the aura of that level that has not dissipated after his promotion. As long as I am willing, I can help one of you make a breakthrough like him. He wants to take I am a stepping stone, so I will send him out as a stepping stone. It is fair, right? The old man didn't seem to care about Subai's previous kick to him. Instead, he slowly rolled the wheelchair to the fat man, and put his old and skinny hand on the fat man's belly. She should have tried her best to ask you to take action against me, right? A person like her would hate to see her slaves being disrespectful to her, haha. The fat man nodded, and at the same time there was a touch of excitement in his heart. Subai's kick that was not in his calculations seemed to have resulted in a real kick. He did not take any action, even after the princess's remnant soul encouraged her desperately. He didn't take any action at all. He should be sitting very well here. Well, at least compared to the guy next to him who kicked someone in the face, he was already very tall. Alas, the old man was a little sad. You know, the price of helping to get promoted is to lose the decades that could have been spent living on, and to return to dust and dust. The fat man licked his lips and said, thank you for your hard work at this time. Even a fat man with a smooth tongue knew that talking too much would lead to mistakes. So, get ready, the old man said. Well, okay, the fat man took a deep breath and suppressed his displeasure. There was no other way. Not many people could resist the temptation of being promoted to a senior audience. What should you do? I asked him to prepare. The old man stretched out his hand and pointed at Subai. Haha, it wasn't until that kick came down that I realized why I was so bored that I opened the node to let outsiders in every few years. In fact, in my heart I also want to end my boring and meaningless life as soon as possible. Fatty. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 697. Chapter 697. There is another chapter in the evening, which I am currently writing, and I have promised to make up for it today without delay. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 698. Mr. Lei was drinking tea, either loose tea bought in the supermarket or water that was almost boiling from the faucet in the hotel room. He was the only one in the room, but someone wanted to visit him, but as soon as he got close to the door of his room, he started to feel dizzy. He wanted to come and become a familiar person, so he knew in his heart that the other person didn't want to see guests, so he left without hesitation. Lu Tao also enjoyed public treatment. He stood outside the door and shouted twice, but Mr. Lei still did not respond. The administrator of the forum and the organizer of this event also touched the tip of his nose and stepped back. Most of the people came back and appeared directly outside the door of room 233, but some people still didn't come back. Everyone only knew Zhang Bei. Lu Tao and Mr. Lei knew that besides Zhang Bei, there was also Sunday the Sea and the young man in black sportswear. 3 people didn't come back. Lu Tao knew what Sun Hai was doing inside, but he didn't know what the next situation would be like. But in his heart, he still didn't want Sun Hai to successfully advance to the senior audience level. He was also a human being. Naturally, there will also be emotions and desires, as well as jealousy. A few listeners have chosen to leave the hotel, but most of them continue to stay. They still want to see what the final outcome will be. If someone really takes out the magic weapon from inside, even if it cannot be snatched, it can be opened. It's also good to open your eyes. Mr. Lay's room was quiet, but he had already packed up his greetings. He was planning to leave, because there was no point in staying any longer. Mr. Lay stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom, taking care of his collar. The humid climate also stained the bathroom glass with a layer of water mist. Mr. Lay stretched out his finger to draw a circle on the mirror, and then stood in the mirror. He looked at it quietly in front of him, as if thinking and appreciating. When Sun Hai entered, Mr. Lay did not stop him, because since this is a circle and a spiral nest, if he forcibly changes it, he will either succeed in changing it, or he will also be dragged into the spiral nest. Middle. Before Mr. Lay could get out of looking at the circle, his cell phone on the table outside rang. Mr. Lay walked out of the bathroom and answered the phone. Lao Lay, how are things over there? You told me before that you might have a good discovery, but I've been waiting here. Some things cannot see the light, even if they are in our hands. If we force them to see the light, they will degrade too much and become useless. Mr. Lay replied unhurriedly. Haha, that kind of thing is the most disgusting. First it makes you feel itchy, but then you can't take it as your own. It's boring. There was the sound of waves lapping on the shore from the other side. It should be someone standing there seaside. What about you, when will you come back? Mr. Lay asked. Come on, I'm on a cruise ship now. I'm having a drink every day with a girl by my side. I'm so comfortable. The number of listeners in Hong Kong and Macau is relatively small, just a high-level listener. But I've discovered how much people care about the quality of life. The pursuit is something that we, the mainland audience, cannot compare with. Everyone's emphasis is just different. By the way, isn't there a casino there? You can go there and have fun. It should be quite interesting to try to see how well you can play without using your own strength, just to see how lucky you are. Macau's first online casino is online, and the beautiful dealer deals cards online, ha 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 ha. The other end of the phone couldn't help but laugh as he spoke. What do you mean? Mr. Lay obviously didn't understand. Old Lay, you are too stoic. Okay, I won't say more. If you don't get anything, you can wait until I come back to see. Maybe I can actually get something good when I go to see with that guy this time. When we come back, we can't have bad luck together, can we? Joe Fan, be careful. Haha, I know. After hanging up the phone, Mr. Lay shook his head. He knew clearly that it must be the joke Joe Fan said before. He didn't understand it. Also, there was a big age gap between him and him, so it would be a good idea for the two of them to become friends in the audience. Quite a surprising thing. Come out. Mr. Lay wanted to pick up the teacup and take another sip of tea, but stopped and said. Menby's figure appeared from the wall behind Mr. Lay. He changed his clothes. He took off his suit and short-sleeved shorts. A large area of black skin was exposed. The third leg in the middle of the shorts was very obvious. Do you know what will happen if you offend a high-level audience from another country? Mr. Lay asked, changing his previous tone. As an outside audience, the other party was so unruly, which was enough to make Mr. Lay angry. Mr. Lay, don't be angry, don't be angry. I'm here. I just want to ask something. This matter may be useful to you. Menby's pointed at his neck. It's right here, Mr. Lay, please take a look. There is a scar on my neck from someone pinching it last night, and it hasn't faded yet. Do you know who did it? There is no other meaning. I am stupid and offended that adult, so I want to find a chance to make up for it. Mr. Lay took 2 steps closer to Menby's, looked at the scratches on his neck, smiled thoughtfully, and said, "He didn't kill you then, so you don't have to think about anything else. So, Mr. Lay, can you tell me who that adult is?" "Who is he?" Mr. Lay turned around and faced the window. The rain outside had just stopped and the sky was still dark. "Tell me, will the sun come out tomorrow?" I'm not sure about this. Even the weather forecast can't be 100% accurate," Menbies answered seriously, although he thought this question was very naive. "Then I can't answer it," Mr. Lay said. "Fatty." When the fat man heard that the old man actually chose to help Subai, he almost spit out a mouthful of old blood. "Damn it, you say it again, I really regret it. Are you a bitch? They kicked you in the face. You want to help others get promoted after kicking me. If I had known, I should have gone up first and crushed your balls together. What exactly is going on? What exactly is going on?" The fat man's eyes widened, but his gaze became even more hollow. He didn't understand why all this happened. The result of his previous calculation was that Subai got the final benefit, but Subai clearly did not follow the pre-designed conditions. Why is it Subai who gets the benefit in the end? This is impossible. How is this possible? The fat man was in a mess. Perhaps the bigger blow than not being able to get help from Jin Zi was that the fat man had great deviations and doubts about cause and effect. No matter how you calculate it, it's all Subai's profit, so I'm still playing around, struggling, and jumping around. Have you seen the reality clearly? As long as you are with him, your luck will be taken away by him. You will never be able to surpass him and can only slowly live in his shadow. The remaining soul of the princess at this time he spoke. "Bitch, shut up." The fat man roared. This time he didn't roar in his heart, but shouted directly. Jin Zi smiled slightly. Apparently, he could hear what the princess's remnant soul said. Subai was also laughing. "This world is really interesting, and this piece of gold is also quite interesting." The footprints on his face have not completely disappeared, but they are about to change hands to help him be promoted to a senior audience. Seeing the fat man's aggrieved look, Subai did not offer any comfort, because Subai could not give up this opportunity to the fat man. He longed for power, he needed power. He wanted to find the man and the woman, and find the little girl. "Guy, although the nearly 3 months of torture on the desert island made me improve a lot, it failed to promote me to a high-level listener. Now, I have a chance. Even if there are other plans for this piece of gold, Subai also I don't care, I have to jump in." Therefore, it would be too artificial to say anything to the fat man at this time. It is impossible for him to do such a thing, and the fat man does not need such comfort. "Are you ready? There may be some pain and pain. If you hold on, you will have a chance to advance. If you can't hold on, just be buried with me." The old man said it very straightforwardly. After all, everyone knew that in this way, it is a very risky thing to forcefully advance to advanced listeners through a borrowed method. "Come on." Subai walked to Sun Hai's frozen body. There was nothing to prepare. Ever since the day the little guy was taken away, Subai had been making preparations, becoming stronger, stronger, stronger. Becoming stronger is now Subai's biggest and almost only pursuit. Only by becoming stronger can we have a chance to find the hiding place of the man and the woman. Only by becoming stronger can we find the little guy. Only by becoming stronger can we not repeat the frustration and helplessness of that rainy night in Shanghai. Jin Zi smiled, pushed his wheelchair to the side, and opened a certain distance. "Wait." The fat man suddenly raised his hand and shouted. Subai looked at the fat man, and Jin Zi also looked at the fat man. The fat man said he and glared at Subai and Jin Zi with a somewhat vicious look. "Dabai, give me another cigarette." Subai took out his cigarette and lighter and threw them to the fat man. The fat man lit one and bit it in his mouth, took a deep breath, took out his formation flag and warned the piece of gold. You bitch, if you want to help me get promoted, don't play tricks on me. Fatty has arranged the formation here. If anything happens to Dabai, believe it or not, even if Fatty comes with a burning soul, you will be able to stop him for a while. If you can't die, I will forcefully arrest you and burn you for 77-49 days. The fat man looked at Subai again. Concentrate on advancing and don't be distracted. Fatty, I will protect you next to you. Hearing this, Subai closed his eyes. There is a fat man protecting the Dharma. He felt at ease. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 699. The old man leaned limply on the wheelchair, calmly watching the fat man arrange the formation, while Subai stood with Sun Hai's frozen corpse, eyes closed. For Subai, this opportunity was very important. However, after the initial excitement, Subai slowly calmed down. No matter what, he could not be impatient. After all, Sun Hai had learned from the past. In front of you, to be promoted to a senior audience, you must seize the opportunity, work hard, and have the belief that you will succeed if you don't succeed. Furthermore, this opportunity was not earned by oneself, but kicked out by oneself. Things that are easily obtained will not be cherished so much. This is very suitable for Subai now, and therefore, Subai a little more peaceful. Is it okay? The old man seemed to be about to fall asleep and was a little depressed. He was asking the fat man. The fat man wiped the sweat from his palms and nodded. Then, let's get started. The old man smiled and snapped his fingers. Subai's eyes opened instantly, because he felt that the space around him began to flow backwards. At the same time, Sun Hai's body also began to change, and gradually began to disappear. If he dies, he can't go back to the past, the old man said softly. You only have one chance, and it's much worse than his chance. After all, what you use is second-hand goods. Whether you can succeed depends on it's your own creation. The old man still has one sentence left, that is, success depends not only on your luck, but also on my ability to survive until that time. This kind of false reversal in one's own node is also extremely draining of energy. The old man didn't intend to linger any longer, so he planned to go crazy before dying, which could be regarded as revenge for Sun Hai who had caused him to be like this, but he himself didn't know when his old candle would die. Will suddenly go out. If Subai has not succeeded yet, but he has already died, then he can only say haha. The old man did not say this, because he also knew that even if he said it, neither of the two young people in front of him will give up this opportunity. Some people are obsessed with women, some are obsessed with power, and some are obsessed with money. But for the kind of people in front of him, the old man knows very well that they are obsessed with power and will do anything for power. Sun Hai's body gradually turned into a faint shadow, and slowly moved towards Subai, gradually overlapping with Subai's body. Subai opened his hands and slowly raised his arms. His eyes began to shine with a strange light, as if there was another person's eyes. At this moment, his feelings, his perceptions, as well as his nerves and experiences, everything slowly reproduced the state that Sun Hai was in when he was promoted. Sun Hai completed 90% of the 100% promotion to the advanced audience. What the old man is doing now seems to be to transfer the power in Sun Hai's body that he had previously fixed and not completely dissipated to Subai's body to become Subai's advanced assistance. But in fact, the more important essence is the feeling when Sun Hai is promoted. That kind of body, soul, and even every feeling down to the cells are all copied to Subai. This is the key to Guanji Unzhong, and it is also the most important. Jin Zi once said to Fatty before that it is more difficult to help Fatty get promoted, because Fatty Jin Zi's primitive accumulation is not enough, at least compared to someone like Sudbai, it is still far behind. The reason why the old man chose Sudbai over the fat man, apart from personal willful emotional factors or the sympathy between mental patients, was that in the old man's opinion, Sudbai's success rate was much higher than that of the fat man. The old man could I don't want the last thing I did before burning my life or calling it revenge to end in failure. Opportunities have always been reserved for those who are prepared. Sudbai's preparation played a very important role in this aspect. Of course, luck was also an indispensable part. The fat man calmed down and put aside all distracting thoughts. Since Dabai is now promoted, he will try his best to fulfill his duty as a protector. Even if we don't look at his previous friendship and relationship with Dabai, just looking at him now, even if he takes action, it will be a complete act. Fatty is not that stupid if he behaves in a way that harms others and does not benefit oneself. At this point, Fatty could only hope that Sudbai would succeed. When the body's senses, as well as the emotions and soul fluctuations, had actively merged with the external perception, Sudbai suddenly clenched his hands and raised them, his eyes condensed, and he let out a roar in his throat. Roar. Advanced audience level, the impact begins. The power contained in Sudbai's body began to boil at this time. After such a long period of accumulation, such a long period of hard work, and such a long period of suppression, Sudbai needed to be completely released at this time. He needed power, he needed it urgently, so he didn't give this opportunity to Fatty because he couldn't afford to wait. Waiting for one more day would be torture for Sudbai. Facing the enemy's ignorance and the little guy's lack of news, all day and night tortured Sudbai's nerves. As a mentally ill person, he seemed to be happy, but he was reduced to the point where he couldn't even touch the table when he wanted to overturn it. He didn't even know where his feet were. This was a huge pressure. It was crushing not only Sudbai himself, but also his life and his entire life. Sudbai's left eye was as red as blood. This was the excitement of the Blood Clan's power. Sudbai's right eye was dark and gloomy, like an abyss. This was the roar of zombie blood. When he was promoted to a high-level listener, when his power burst out, Sudbai relied most on the two bloodlines of vampires and zombies. It's like climbing a mountain. You were walking aimlessly, but now you see a guiding light telling you where to climb to the top to see the sun rise. All that's left is to fight with all your strength and perseverance. Sudbai is really not afraid of this. He can take one step forward into the vast sky and one step back into the abyss. Gradually, the aura on Sudbai's body began to become unusual. An aura belonging to his high-level audience was slowly exuding. It was like a door lock. Sudbai had found the key and inserted it. There you go, you just need to slowly turn the lock cylinder to open the door, and everything will be successful. The blood in the left eye began to become more intense, and the ink in the right eye began to become darker. Gradually, Sudbai's hair began to show a color that blended blood and ink, purple. This is a sign that the two bloodlines merge into one. A long time ago, Sudbai once saw his own clone 1 year later in the story world. It was the Sudbai 1 year later calculated by the broadcaster. That Sudbai, his hair was purple. Later, when he was studying the art of death with the zombie-enhanced perverted little boy, Sudbai had an enlightenment. After merging his two bloodlines for a short time, he seemed to have figured out that feeling. At least, my hair turned purple at that time. At this time, the two strongest bloodline forces that he relied on condensed into one, and continued to provide Sudbai with the motivation to move forward. It takes 10 days to chop wood and 1 day to burn it. All the previous accumulation has become the key to opening that door now. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Squeeze out everything you can and go to Carp to leap over the dragon gate. There are not many people in the audience who are more experienced than Sudbai on how to make a desperate move, how to put everything you have into a stud. There really aren't many people in the audience. When the zombie bloodline and the vampire bloodline merged into one, Sudbai's aura of advanced listeners further improved, suddenly rising to 40%. Almost half of it was completed, and before Sun Hai only finished 90% and stopped by himself, Sudbai would never stop. No matter what happened, he would not allow himself to stop. Deliver. The old man waved his finger, and Sun Hai's body completely collapsed. The remaining power in his body was injected into Sudbai's body, instantly increasing the aura of the advanced audience on Sudbai's body to 50%. With half a foot, you have already stepped into the threshold of advanced listeners. Bloodline. The purple-haired Sudbai roared angrily. On his body, bloodlines were revealed. The bloodlines were like fire and began to burn, as if they were branded on the skin, in the blood, and in the bones. 60%. Ice. Frost came, covering the whole body, and frost began to form all around. The power of ice was injected into Sudbai's body. One step further, 70%. Dragon scales. The dragon scales that had been fused in the body melted at this time. This dragon scale was directly used by Sudbai as a disposable consumable. When it completely melted, the most essence of power was injected into Sudbai's body, allowing Sudbai's aura increased again by 10%, 80%. There is no pity, and there is no reluctance. At this time, it is all about smashing. At this time, it is all about relying on that breath to be willing to cut yourself off and break out of a new world of your own. 80%, already 80%. Sudbai's accumulation was already terrifying. He was only 20% away from establishing himself as a high-level listener. Hellfire shotgun. 2 Hellfire shotguns appeared in front of Sudbai, and Sudbai had a look of pity on his face. This weapon he exchanged for the first time later became his natal weapon, and it followed him for a long time. And also experienced many battles with myself. But, I'm sorry. I have no choice. Smelting. The Hellfire shotgun shattered, and the golden light merged into Sudbai's body. For a moment, a burst of explosion sound came from Sudbai's body. Roar. A roar came from Sudbai's throat. In this roar, Sudbai's aura of a high-level audience was once again enhanced. 90%. 90%. 90%. There's only one point left, just the last point. That's where Sun Hai finally reached. The fat man on the side also began to get excited and his breathing began to become rapid. He was about to witness Bimax becoming a high-level audience. However, at this moment, the old man sitting in the wheelchair suddenly tilted his neck and leaned on his shoulder. Died. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 700. Chapter 700. There is one more chapter in the evening. I will finish writing the advanced steps. Don't panic and hold the dragon tight.